Hello and welcome. This is episode 71. I hope you're all well. I am hiding in my bedroom to record this late at night as my husband is playing silly computer games downstairs and, as we've already established, has the loudest voice in the world ever. And it's bloody freezing. You know how the Brits are famed for moaning about the weather, or at least always talking about the weather? That's because it doesn't know what it's bloody doing. It was warm today, now I'm freezing. Also, for those of you who listened to episode 70 where we talked about room at 1046, I've heard from my Italian friend, one of my reasons for thinking that the mafia couldn't be involved was the letters sent to the mother after the murder, and I've been informed that this is not unusual. The mafia, good Italians, they would not want the mother to suffer for her child's misdemeanours. I'd forgotten, I have to say, the sacred nature of the mother for Italian families. And so me having thought, these big tough men of the mob would not bother with such fripperies as writing to a mother, but they are mama's boys. So thank you for that update. And also, everyone is raving about the new Jeffrey Dahmer documentary, which I haven't watched yet. I particularly hate him. I kind of want to slap him. I mean, I want to slap a lot of people, but just the sight of his face, and he's grim. Him and Dennis Nielsen. Ugh. Anyway. So it's also, when I'm not working or researching for this podcast, I like to watch quite nice, comforting TV. I'm either watching true crime or something not at all horrifying or scary. My husband waits until I'm out and then he watches. It's not even necessarily, I've just got quite a wet taste in TV. He'll watch stuff like, he loved Ozarks, he'll watch Narcos. I can't remember what he's watching at the moment while I'm out. Otherwise, we are through the we're still going through our rewatch of The West Wing, but we are nearly at the end. So maybe when we finish The West Wing, I will bite the bullet and watch the new Dahmer documentary. I really want to hear your true crime and spooky stories for our Halloween episode, so don't forget to email them in or send them via DM on our social media. All of that info is going to be in the show notes. Let's pull our finger out and talk about today's episode. Bert Kearney returns to his home, 1408 Marshall Avenue in Mattoon, Illinois, at 12:30 a.m. on the 2nd of September 1944, and thought he saw a tall man in dark clothes and a tight-fitting cap at his bedroom window. Now, he lives in a one-story house, so it's not a particularly tall man, necessarily. I mean, he is tall. He lives in a one-story house, so although he is a tall man, he's not a frighteningly tall man. He chases the man, but the would-be home invader gets away. When Bert goes and enters his home, he realises something strange has been going on while he's been at work driving a taxi. His wife, Aline, has spent the evening with her sister, counting money from a cheque Kearney has cashed earlier in the day. Now, Aline has been really concerned when she went to bed because the money counting had taken place on a table visible through an open window, open curtains, open window, single-story house, and she was worried that someone had seen them. Now, her husband was working a late shift, so that also made her feel really uneasy. But also there'd been stories from the police and in the local press that they were looking for an escaped Nazi from a nearby prisoner of war camp, and there had also been reports in the area of a prowler. Aline went to bed at about 11 p.m, as did Martha, her sister, who was staying with her. And Aline was sleeping with her 3-year-old daughter. And as she got into bed, she smelt the strong, sweet smell, which she assumed to be flowers coming in from outside. But as the smell got stronger, she started to lose feeling in her legs. She screamed to her sister to come, and her sister also noticed the smell and thought it was coming through the open window. She ran next door to the neighbours, the Robinsons, who called the police, and Mr. Robinson and the police searched the house and all round outside and found nothing. No footprints, nothing. So then Bert comes home, and after he has chased this man away, the police are called again, and again they don't find anyone. Elaine's paralysis subsides within about 30 minutes, though she reported feeling a burning sensation in her mouth and nose, but their daughter was ill until the next morning. The description of the man chased by Kearney is circulated to local media, who wrongly reported this to be the first Gasser attack. But in fact, on the 31st of August, at a house on Grant Avenue, Urban Rafe had been awakened during the early hours of the morning by a strange smell. He felt nauseated and weak and was then really sick. His wife tried to check the kitchen stove, suspecting that her husband was suffering from a domestic gas poisoning, but found that she was partially paralysed and unable to leave her bed. Later that same night, a young woman living close by reported a similar incident. She was awakened by the sound of her daughter coughing, but found herself unable to leave her bed. The woman, who remained anonymous, reported the incident to the police, and the local paper, the Mattoon Journal-Gazette, published the headline, "Anaesthetic Prowler on the Loose." This was big news in a town like Mattoon, which had a population of 17,000, 97% of which received the Mattoon Journal-Gazette. These were the first cases attributed to the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, and in the days following the attack at the Kearneys, there was at least half a dozen more. In fact, over the ensuing 2-week period, 25 residents reported waking up in the middle of the night to a heavy smell of gas that caused choking, vomiting, and temporary paralysis. Soon the news spread to Chicago, and the Mad Gasser became a national figure. The entire 10-man Mattoon police force was put on the case, though no one was able to identify the culprit, and so the state police were called in, followed by the Army's Chemical Warfare Service. Armed bands of vigilantes took to the streets, and the police had trouble controlling this unruly mob, and in the end the FBI would be called in. However, there were pieces of evidence found at some scenes. The first was found on the night of the 5th of September, when Carl and Beulah Cord at North 21st Street returned home at around 10 p.m. After spending a few minutes in the house, they noticed a piece of white cloth, slightly larger than a man's handkerchief, sitting on their porch next to the screen door. Beulah Cord picked up the cloth and smelled it, which seems a little odd, though maybe I'm speaking in 2022 and this is 1944. We're a little bit more stranger danger, freaky germ people now. But I don't think if I found someone's handkerchief I would necessarily smell it. Anyway, she smells the cloth, and as soon as she inhales, she becomes violently ill. She described the effect as being like an electric shock. Her face immediately began to swell. She experienced a burning sensation in her mouth and throat and began to vomit. As with other victims, she also reported feeling weak and experiencing partial paralysis of her legs. Beulah Cord said later that she believed the cloth had been left on the porch in order to knock out the family dog, which usually slept there, so that the prowler could gain access to the house. In addition to the cloth, a skeleton key, described as looking well used, was reportedly found on the pavement adjacent to the porch, along with a large, almost empty tube of lipstick. When the cloth was analysed by police, they found no trace of chemicals whatsoever that could explain Beulah's reaction. The same night, a second incident was reported, this time in North 13th Street, which I can only assume is kind of one street over. at the home of Mrs. Leonard Burrell, who reported seeing a stranger break in through her bedroom window and then attempt to gas her. People were reporting finding footprints and cuts to the screen coverings on their windows. Mrs. Violet Driscoll and her daughter Ramona woke up in the middle of the night to hear someone removing the storm sash on their bedroom window. They got out of bed and tried to run outside for help, but fumes overcame Ramona and she began vomiting. Her mother saw a man running away from the house. Later that same evening, the gasser sprayed fumes into the partially open window of a room where Mrs. Russell Bailey, Catherine Tuzzo, Mrs. Genevieve Haskell, and Mrs. Haskell's young son were sleeping. At another home, Miss Frances Smith, the principal of the Columbian Grade School, and her sister Maxine were also overwhelmed with gas and became ill. They began choking as they were awakened and felt partial paralysis in their legs and arms. They also said they could smell the sweet smell to begin with, and then they saw a thin blue vapour. They heard a buzzing noise from outside and believed it was the gas's spraying apparatus in operation. So it's getting more and more technical. In fact, by the 12th of September, local police had received so many false alarms, mostly from citizens believing that they smelled gas or that they'd seen a prowler, that they reduced the priority afforded to gas reports and announced that the entire incident was likely the result of explainable occurrences exacerbated by public fears and a sign of the anxiety felt by women while their local men were away at war. It's probable that the women are to blame, isn't it? It seems likely to me. Women are usually to blame for this sort of thing. After the police announcement, gasser reports declined. The only incident of any note after that date was the case of Bertha Birch, who claimed she saw a gasser who was a woman dressed as a man running away from her house. Would this explain the empty tube of lipstick? I, for one, wouldn't dream of going on a mad gassing rampage without taking my lipstick with me, so we can only assume this makes a whole load of sense. Many believe that it was the tone taken by the media that resulted in the phenomenon that is the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, at first spreading a description of the man designed by Kearney, and by the 11th of September talking about how many of the prowler reports were in fact imagined. There are, of course, quite a few theories on what could have happened. Who was the Mad Gasser of Mattoon? Some believe it was a local resident out to seek revenge, possibly Farley Llewellyn, the town outcast and son of a grocery store owner who had been ostracised for being gay. To be fair, there's lots of reasons why Llewellyn would make a great suspect. He was tall and thin, matching the description of the man thought to be seen outside the Kearney house. He had graduated from the University of Illinois with a chemistry degree, and he had a home lab in which he would tinker about whilst drunk. There are also stories that he said he was going to get revenge on people who had teased him for being gay, but as far as I could tell, there's no evidence that the people he attacked, there seems to be not a lot of link except for geographical area. So they're all within a certain area of Mattoon that these attacks are taking place, and you would hope that someone would have looked into whether the people who had ostracised Llewellyn whether they were the people that were being targeted. Anyway, it doesn't look good for Llewellyn, but scientists were extremely sceptical that a mad genius could produce a gas that would be stable enough to make someone sick, but fleeting enough to not leave any trace. One of the chemicals Llewellyn used was tetrachloride, which, if inhaled, could cause headaches, fatigue, and vomiting. But as far as I know, there's no chemical that you can inhale that will paralyze just one part of your body. So what seems very odd is all the paralysis seems to be just the legs, and I think scientifically, if you inhale something, although the things you inhale will cause different symptoms, paralysis may be one of those symptoms, but it cannot be specific to a certain area of the body. Also, in terms of gassing someone through an open window, would obviously be quite difficult. You'd need quite a lot of gas that you'd have to carry with you. As far as we know, when Kearney was chasing someone off, he was able to escape. He wasn't carrying something incredibly heavy. Something that was taken into account at the time was the proximity of the Atlas diesel engine plant, but they were really quick to deny any allegations, maintaining that their only use for gas in the plant was in the fire extinguishers that they had, and any similar gases used there caused no ill effects in the air. Besides, why hadn't this gas ever caused problems in the city before? And how exactly was the gas cutting the window screens on the Mattoon homes before causing nausea and paralysis? And as far as we know, none of the workers were ever affected, so that's quickly ruled out. Others have put it down to paranormal events, but as the Mattoon Commissioner Thomas Wright was quoted in the 11th of September edition to the Charleston newspaper, there was more than one madman in Mattoon. There's 15,000 of them. What we've got here is mass hysteria, and it's believed to be the first scientifically documented case of mass hysteria in US history. The story spread across the country and dominated the press for a little less than 2 weeks, and that might be all it was, a little blip in US history, had it not been for the curiosity of psychology student Donald Johnson, who was studying at the University of Illinois and decided to visit Mattoon in the weeks after the event. In 1945, he published a study of the case in the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology, and his research is cited in many textbooks as a classic study of mass hysteria. This may seem bizarre, but by September 1944, the Second World War was winding down, and people everywhere were worried about poison gas weapons. This fear was based with many all too familiar with the result of mustard gas used in the First World War. They'd heard and seen horrible results of this gas. So though the idea of a prowler pumping gas into someone's home with no other motive than to incapacitate the occupants might seem a little far-fetched, this heightened awareness to possible gas attacks could indeed trigger and contribute to mass hysteria. And also because everyone kind of knew that Hitler was getting his ass whooped at this point, the thought of him doing something like a mass gassing of the US wasn't beyond the realms of imagination. So mass hysteria annoyingly affects mostly women, and so it was with the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, though some men were affected, and during 1944, a lot of states in the US, as with any country involved in the war, would be rather lacking in men. So there probably was a higher female population at the time anyway. But there are believed to be certain other symptoms that have no plausible organic basis that are a feature of mass hysteria. Symptoms that are transient and benign, so that's the case for all who suffered from the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. The paralysis didn't last long, up to 30 minutes. The vomiting and nausea didn't last long. The burning sensation and swelling, if anything, lasted until the next day. Symptoms with rapid onset and recovery, so literally people either smelt the smell or woke up and were vomiting or were paralysed immediately, and then it's over. Occurrence in a segregated group. So this doesn't really happen, although it does happen in certain areas. So it's all in certain neighbourhoods, really, of Mattoon. The initial incidents. Eventually it gets to the stage where people are like, I was gassed in the hospital whilst having an operation, or I was gassed in the park while sitting on a bench. the presence of extraordinary anxiety. So again, that could be the war, that could be the fear of gas attack. Symptoms that are spread via sight, sound, or oral communication. So a lot of people believe that it was the reporting in the media on this that caused the mass hysteria. And what's really interesting is the first report of this attack, the first report of the Mad Gasser, they say first victims, even though as far as they should know at the time, why would they think there would be any future victims? So it's use of language like that can cause mass hysteria. A spread that moves down the age scale, beginning with older and higher status people. And again, it is few children are affected. And it's almost like with the Kearneys, for example, the mother feels paralysis in her legs, but the daughter, I believe, is vomiting, and it could be kids get bugs. The daughter is vomiting. It's not linked to the paralysis. Common ailments in mass hysteria include headaches, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, abdominal pain, sore or burning throat, difficulty breathing, vomiting, tingling, paralysis, all of which happened in Mattoon. So it's not looking great. It does look possible mass hysteria, and that is why this comes under this urban legends. But there are a few things that are definitely weird. Who was outside the Kearney house? Did Bert know Farley Llewellyn? Could he have recognised him? Now, the description of the gasser is always the same. They always say it's the tall, thin man that exactly like Bert saw. But in the papers, Bert's description of the man was given. So again, that could just be, we know that 97% of the town got the paper. So it could just be that they read the description of the man and that's who they then saw. But it's slightly weird. Bert obviously saw this man and chased him before he knew what was going on with his wife inside. He literally just turned up at home and saw a man looking in the window. It also seems weird that the smell was so obvious to Elaine and the smell was really still present when Martha smelt it. But just chemically speaking, I don't know how you would be able to pipe gas into a room with an open window for it to affect one person in such a specific way, and then it doesn't affect her sister. When her sister comes running in, two minutes later, I mean, she starts screaming as soon as she feels paralysed. Her sister comes in immediately, is not affected by the gas. So there are definitely a few weird anomalies about this case, but it is scientifically maintained to be the first example of mass hysteria in US history. And it's incredibly interesting how, if you read the headlines and read the articles about it, I mean, it was mentioned daily, even when there were no gas attacks reported. The headlines would read no attacks, or the Mad Gasser of Mattoon has taken a day off or something. It would always be in the paper. And then once the press decided that it was more hoax than real, the reports started to tail off. And that seems very telling to me, that once the pet press did the headline saying lots of tips coming in, few of them are real, the tips stop coming in, the attacks stop happening. And in fact, it goes on for a very short amount of time. I'd love to know what you think. I'm not good enough at science to know about the possibility of gassing someone, and the Farley Llewellyn seems like a very good person to pick for it, because he was an outsider, he wanted revenge, allegedly, he was unhappy, he was a chemist. Because otherwise, why would you post gas into a room that just to briefly incapacitate someone or to make them sick, unless it's for revenge? There's no reports of anyone really breaking in. It could be, if you've got your screen door broken, that's nothing to do with the Mad Gasser, perhaps. So there's lots of weird bits to unpick in this one, but it's a lot of hearsay. And that is the story of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. I hope you liked it. Please email me themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. You can find us on social media. It's TikTok. Where else? TikTok. Facebook, Instagram at The Monday Night Review, and you can come over and join the Patreon, where you will find extra stories, mini-sodes, and other good stuff. Please email me or message me your spooky Halloween stories. They can be true crime, they can be weird, unexplained, paranormal, whatever it is, I want to hear it. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.